Hey everyone, it's Chris Carter here from the North Shore Drive podcast, joined today by Brian Batko. We're going to talk more about the trade that the Steelers made for Jalen Ramsey, what schematic changes the Steelers coaching staff has to make with their new cornerback, switching out Minkah Fitzpatrick, but also what egos do the Steelers have to watch out for this year, and how much will coaching play a factor into managing that? And is the front office really going in a new direction? All that debated here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. We're your Steelers writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, you can find this show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Not only do they help you when you're injured in an accident, they also help you out with workers' compensation. Be sure to call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. More on them later. Brian, we've now had time to settle in on this trade. When we talked about it on a live stream on Monday, it was a very raw reaction to what had happened. But now we've gotten some time to think things over. We're writing things about it. I wrote an analysis piece that kind of broke down where I think things could be different for the Steelers with Jalen Ramsey versus Minkah Fitzpatrick. But one thing that
I want to keep talking about the trade. You don't want to get into the backup swing tackle competition that's going to take place in Latrobe, or
when I'm on vacation next week, you guys can handle all of that. That's I'm so happy to let you guys handle that one. But in all seriousness, like this is a move where you're exchanging two players who've been former three-time All-Pros, but haven't been All-Pros for multiple seasons. And Jalen Ramsey is slightly older than Minkah Fitzpatrick. I wrote about for the Post-Gazette for this morning about how this move might reflect the positional value of what the Steelers are doing and trying to get a playmaker creator at the cornerback position who's a similar value, who's a similar talent as the safety position. But to me, this is also going to say, like, hey, where they may have been trying to scheme up ways to get Minkah Fitzpatrick in a turnover creating situation. It worked for most of his years in Pittsburgh, just not the last two. Maybe it's just about, hey, the coaching, the schematic changes, they're going to have a higher emphasis on getting Jalen Ramsey in those positions. And maybe that will be easier to do because he'll be at the line of scrimmage rather than playing 10, 20 yards off the ball because he's the safety.
Yeah, I think, I'm still kind of trying to make sense of this trade. And, when people ask me a grade for the trade, I'll maybe give it a B+, but I also give it an incomplete because I want to hear more from the people who made this happen. Right. What the ultimate plan and vision for it is, because I think we kind of were getting at this on Monday. Is it's like it's so much tougher to evaluate this than they traded George Pickens or they traded Deontay Johnson or even Kenny Pickett at the time because Russell Wilson was already in the fold. It's like this trade is so dense and it's so complex and there's so many moving parts to it. Not to mention just how surprising it was to see Minkah Fitzpatrick unloaded in this deal that, it does almost still kind of feel like the Steelers are your crazy uncle who starts acting erratically and he's growing a goatee. He's posting his own poetry on Facebook. He bought a Mustang out of nowhere. You're like,
this sounds very, very specific, Brian. You have a crazy uncle that's doing these things.
No, but it's like, you're like, all right, is he having a mental breakdown, midlife crisis, or is he actually at peace and knows exactly what he's doing and he's happy? So I don't know where the Steelers fall in that analogy, but I thought your write-up on it was good because
thank you.
If the bottom line here is that Minkah Fitzpatrick and the team were sort of at odds over the best way to use him, maybe Minkah's saying, I need to be in the post. That's where I'm at my best. That plays to my strengths. But then the Steelers are probably coming back with, but we're paying you $20+ million a year. We need production from that. We can't just have you keeping a lid on it all the time. Yes, that's important, but you're also here to be the ball hawk that you were early in your career. And if that's not really what he's able or wanting to do anymore, then I can understand thinking Jalen Ramsey, even like you said, a couple years older, a little bit more tread off the tires, could be an upgrade if he's still, I think when both guys were coming out of college, albeit 2 years apart, Ramsey was looked at as more of just a physical freak, an athletic specimen,
Right.
all the traits of being able to run really fast, jump really high. I think it was always more looked at as a cerebral player. And at this stage, if you're trying to counteract Lamar Jackson in January and he's a transcendent player who makes it feel like they've got 12 against your 11 at all times, you need that guy in your secondary as well. And I don't know that Minkah was that guy anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's the question, is that was he that guy, and could he be that guy in another system again, or could he be, or is this impatience from the Steelers? As far as like, hey, you know what, 2 years of not being a super turnover creator, we need to figure that out. Now, here's another thing: Minkah Fitzpatrick's contract was up next year. After next season, so like he had this year and next year to play on it. He was going to be a $24 million cap hit next season, and if he had another season like he had the last 2 years and you did want to move him, it would have been very hard to get anything for him in the trade. And in this, you at least get a guy who's slightly older, but plays, again, has all pro experience, has been a superstar at his position, maybe is similarly on a decline if Minkah Fitzpatrick is on a decline. And you get him at a position where I think schematically it helps you a little bit more, because it gives you a guy that can be that turnover creator who's closer to the line of scrimmage. As I wrote in my analysis, you look back to where Minkah Fitzpatrick, when he joined the team in 2019 versus this past year, everybody's throwing the ball shorter, quicker, faster, safer. Like there's less deep shots coming out of the NFL every day. There's you look at just the net air yards per attempt. Like Patrick Mahomes is basically throwing himself alone is basically throwing 2.5 yards closer to the line of scrimmage per attempt. And this guy throws 600 passes a year. That's showing that he's not taking the deep ball shots that he used to. And it's not just him. It's across the NFL. There's been a consistent decline in air yards and average depth of target. And with that, I think it's because teams are getting used to how a lot of defenses are deploying, Tampa 2 looks where there's 2 deep safeties. And so they don't want the top taken off them. So they're going to take the safer throws short to close to the line of scrimmage. And so if Minkah Fitzpatrick is playing deep safety and there's just less deep balls going his way, according to sports information systems, there were only 4 times he was challenged deep last year, and none of them were actually incompletions, and none of them were actual completions. Then I get what's going on there, but you need Minkah Fitzpatrick at $22 million a year to be a turnover creator. And at least with Jalen Ramsey, you're saying, hey, if we put him up against the line of scrimmage, he's going to get more of those chances than Minkah would if teams are just continuing to do the check down Charlie stuff. And I think it also could work in congruence with their pass rush, right? Because what's the number one way to beat TJ Watt? Get the ball out fast. And if you have another corner, if you have 3 corners now in Porter, Slay, and Ramsey, who can all help kind of force teams to have to hold the ball, quarterbacks to hold the ball just another half a second or a whole second more, that further helps the chemistry with your pass rush and trying to win on money downs.
Yeah, and that gets to your positional value point that you made. And did that tell us, though, Chris, that the Steelers were very slow to adjust to this? Because
maybe
it's not like this was a sudden sort of shift. And, we know that the NFL is cyclical. Offensive football and schemes are cyclical. Okay, defenses they're doing this now to take this away. Well, we'll get back to that. We've seen that time and time again. And I think we, talked on the show, 2 or 3 weeks ago around my, off times that, like, I think I was wondering, do the Steelers have enough pure speed at safety, or are the elites of the NFL just going to have guys, run go balls past them? And now all of a sudden you are worried about keeping a lid on it. So, yeah, I mean, paying Minkah what they were paying him. And like you said, I don't know that his trade value was in a good place after this season. And I don't know where it would have been if he would have had another mediocre season. But they could have just cut him in 2026 and saved like $17 million, and I think it would have been $6 million dead cap. So they could have gone that way too, had they stayed patient with him. And again, I just come back to, I am surprised that they weren't more patient. every time they talked about Minkah or we would ask about Minkah, we would just get fed the line of, oh, Minkah's doing what he needs to do. He's the backbone of our defense. He allows us to do so many things in front of him because we know we have him back there. Well, that was either those guys running interference for Minkah, and I mean Mike Tomlin, Terrell Austin, defensive players that you would talk to. It was either those guys running interference to protect their guy, or they had a change of heart. They had a change of mind that, no, the juice isn't worth the squeeze anymore with what we're getting for him. Or, yeah, the more we watch it, he's just he's lost a step. And I feel like I had written and said that at times last season and was getting blasted for it. Well, I don't know. I mean, the Steelers are at least partially on that, or at least they think Jalen Ramsey has a lot more steps in him at soon to be 31.
Well, let's talk about Jalen Ramsey, and let's talk about another part of coaching here, which is management of egos and management of personalities, because that is such, I think, an underrated part of what coaches really do at all levels of sports when it comes to managing rosters. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko, stick with us. We got a lot to discuss. But first, I want to remind you the show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you've been injured in an accident, you're probably wondering what's next. Or if you need help with workers' compensation, you're probably saying, who's going to help me? Because when you've been hurt on the job, you know the insurance company doctors, they're not on your side. They're the ones deciding when your treatment's over, when your benefits are over. You need someone who's going to fight for you, who's going to have your back. That's where you go and get Edgar Snyder and Associates. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR because they'll fight for the workers' compensation rights that you deserve. Again, that's Edgar Snyder and Associates at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We are back here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, the Steelers have a lot of big personalities in the building. And maybe not just big personalities, but big names at least. And they had some with their traditional guys like TJ Watt and Cam Heyward, but those are their homegrown guys. But now this year, you've added Aaron Rodgers, who will probably appear on Pat McAfee God knows how many times this year. You've added DK Metcalf, who is now your highest paid ever wide receiver based on the contract. You've added Darius Slay. You've now added Jalen Ramsey, who is known to have a mouth and known to be a big talker. These are all big personalities that they're.
I was going to say, I wouldn't even consider TJ a big personality. I mean, he's kind of just like, let me go out and play. Leave me alone.
That's very true.
Minkah was very much the same way. I mean, he was always kind of shying away from the spotlight.
And so with the addition of these guys, is this going to be a major challenge for Mike Tomlin and this Steelers coaching staff to kind of keep everyone in line? Because to me, like, I know people always talk about schematics, but I think that's some of the biggest things that coaches do is balancing those type of personalities. That's something that I think Chuck Noll was amazing at. When you think about the big personality, Jack Lambert to Lynn Swan to Mean Joe Green, there were tons of guys that were just in way different directions. Terry Bradshaw was another one. Like Chuck Noll knew how to manage all of those guys. And I think Tomlin has done a good job for most of his career in that department. But is this maybe a bit of an overload with all the outside players that the Steelers haven't homegrown being in this factor?
And Mike Tomlin used to always say that's one of the concerns about making big splashes in free agency is you aren't as intimately familiar with those players that don't come up through your system and your organization. I remember him saying that about Melvin Ingram once upon a time, and especially once we were kind of hitting him with questions about what happened that they had to trade him to the Chiefs at the deadline. And that was a disgruntled veteran player who thought he was sold a bill of goods by the Steelers. So for as much as Mike Tomlin gets praised here and nationally for his handling of those things, sometimes it comes out from former players. James Harrison is another one who felt like he wasn't as transparent with them as you sometimes hear from the current guys. So it will be interesting. I mean, only Mike Tomlin would sign up, right, for this much talent, but also, again, guys who have been there, done that in the NFL and are going to want things done a certain way, are going to want to win. You're going to have to get everybody to buy in. Now, partially that's what the money's for. We pay you, you give us your best, you fall in line. But we know it doesn't always work that way in the NFL. It doesn't always work that way in professional sports anywhere. So you've got, DK Metcalf, Jalen Ramsey, Aaron Rodgers. Again, yeah, Darius Slay, all of these guys who they have no history with the Steelers. Sure, that we heard Rodgers talk about all the Western PA people in his life, and they've had a huge, profound impact on him, so he appreciates it. Jalen Ramsey put out that video that made it seem like he certainly understands what it means to play for this organization. Everybody's, saying the right things, but they haven't actually been here. They don't actually have anything invested in Steelers football. So, yeah, I am curious to see, is this going to be a unit that comes together and, everybody's vibing with each other well, or is it going to be a bunch of mercenaries who are here and, they're here for the money, and they'll see what happens in what's going to be an uphill battle in this division, in this conference as well.
We've seen this happen before, right? Where guys have come in and been great. Joe Hayden brought in and was a perfect fit for what the Steelers wanted to do. We've also seen it not go great. LeGarrette Blount walked off the field. I think it was 2016 when that happened. It was 2016, maybe 20. No, it's 2014. It was 2014 when that happened. But 2014, he felt like Le'Veon Bell was getting too many carries and he wasn't being involved enough in a game against the Titans. Walked off the field. The team would cut him later that week. We've seen Melvin Ingram go from, I wouldn't mind if Alex Highsmith started over me, and then Alex Highsmith started over me. He said, "Get me out of here. I don't want to deal with this. I want to be somewhere else." And so, we've seen, and Mike Tomlin talked about, that's why they like to do homegrown guys a lot more, so that they get guys that they can kind of build up, grow an understanding with, and have those things going for them. So I don't know if this is going to lead to that. I do think that this is one thing that Mike Tomlin has generally had as a strength in his career. Despite those two names not working out, there's plenty of other names that the Steelers have added who have all come away and said, "We love Mike Tomlin. We love the Steelers. They're a family organization. They're awesome. I love my time there." And that's something that he's had going for him. But I do think this could push it to the limit. Because Aaron Rodgers, we've seen him not work out with the Jets the last 2 years, and the public sight that became. DK Metcalf's a big name wide receiver. If there's tensions, there's going to be a lot of guys that are making a lot of money and have a lot of positive NFL experience and pedigree who are going to be able to throw their weight around a little bit. Because again, a big part of what talks in locker rooms is money. I know people might not think about it that much, but when you have the contract that says that you're the guy, you get to call more shots. You get to you kind of feel that in the organization. So
they all know what each other are making, right? I mean, everybody knows what bag that guy next to them got, and who's getting this much guaranteed and for how long. Yeah, those things are. I'm not going to talk like I've ever been an NFL player, but those are dynamics in a locker room for sure. So if you're winning, everybody eats. Players love to say that, but the flip side of that, of course, if you're not winning, everybody's ticked off. DK wanted out of Seattle, I think partially because of wanting to get paid more, which the Steelers obliged him, but also his usage or lack thereof with Jackson Smith and Jigba coming in there. And I think he said on Marshawn Lynch's podcast, he felt like his voice wasn't being heard in those offensive meeting rooms by the new staff there with the Seahawks. So, he's got that, recent history. And I always bristle a little when people try to say DK is a diva wide receiver. I don't know that he's had incidences that make you think he's a diva. I mean, he gets frustrated and fiery on the field, sometimes with Jalen Ramsey, but diva seems a bit strong. Ramsey, too. I mean, we know that the early portion of his career in Jacksonville, I mean, he basically went into Derek Bell Operation Shutdown with the Jags and got himself shipped out of town to the Rams. Now, the difference between DK and some of these other guys we mentioned is Ramsey, Slay, Aaron Rodgers, they've won a ring. They've been part of the ultimate team where everything comes together, everyone sacrifices for the greater good. So, they've seen that aspect of it. And the other part of this too, that, I mean, maybe we could even continue on with this in our third segment, Chris. I know you always like to look at kind of the leadership layer of things. I think a lot of the guys who've been brought in recent years, Patrick Peterson had talked about this. Elandon Roberts talked about this. It's like you come into a Steelers environment where Cam Heyward is the big dog. Russell Wilson's talked about this as well. TJ Watt, is former defensive player of the year, NFL sack king. Minkah at the time was in there. You don't really want to step on toes. You want to add to the kind of circle of trust, but you don't want to feel like you're coming in and hijacking it from those guys who have worked and toiled for it for a long time.
Let's talk about that in the next segment, because I do think that's part of it. Is the Steelers do have a leadership structure on the team that's very much present. The question will be, will it be added to, or will it be kind of torn apart in the next few years? And also, let's look at the front office and ask ourselves, are the Steelers changing their ways and how they're making additions to their teams and building? Omar Khan certainly being aggressive. Let's talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. If you're looking for a way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind, step into something more than just a workout. Welcome to the brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym. Here, it's not just about training, it's about living up to the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner or leveling up your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program led by a third-degree black belt instructor who builds confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to the UFC Gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn about the exclusive 3-month introductory package today that's only at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. We're also brought to you by Boss. Boss Menswear has reached icon status for its tailoring, but offers more than just the perfect suit. The collections also feature casual and athleisure pieces, presenting a complete wardrobe for fast-paced modern lifestyles. Tailoring and sportswear are brought together in a look that is ready for whatever the day may hold. Boss, now open at Ross Park Mall with a selection of menswear pieces. Check out Boss at Ross Park Mall today. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, we're continuing our discussion here, just kind of more of the fallout of the trade and where things go. And we talked about that leadership aspect that you were kind of hinting at there. The Steelers adding so many guys that could shuffle into leadership. You've seen me ask guys like Aaron Rodgers, like, where he thought about leadership, and he says, I see myself as a servant leader, saying he doesn't want to uproot anything or reshape everything. He just wants to be a guy that people can look up to. I asked about DK Metcalf similarly, and he talked about, hey, I'll help Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson if they want to, but they're good players in their own rights. And if they I'm not going to try to dictate to them what they should do. I'll help them if they come to me for it. And it seems like those guys have been kind of along those lines. Darius Slay also not seeming like too overbearing as a quote unquote leader to be added to the defense. So is this something that you think will kind of pan out, where these guys are just, hey, I'm happily to just add into the leadership structure as is? Or do you think an upheaval might be coming soon? Because TJ Watt, contract negotiations still going on. I think we both assume he's still going to sign, but that's a question. Cam Heyward, don't know how much longer he'll be in Pittsburgh. Minkah Fitzpatrick was one of those leaders, and now he's gone. Do you see a changing of, I guess, the guard for the Steelers coming really soon, or are these guys actually going to just kind of fit in and just get in where you fit in?
Well, I think it's always fair to even start the discussion with, do we overrate the leadership stuff sometimes? Like, do we get too wrapped up in that when it's really just about hey, can you play? Are you guys going to fit together well on the field? Are the X's and O's going to make sense? But I mean, we've heard in recent years Najee Harris talking about a leadership void on the Steelers offense. No one knew what they were doing. He didn't know who he could even go to. So he's chopping it up with Cam Heyward and guys on that side of the ball, because Kenny Pickett was the quarterback and he was new. Najee, he came in, he got the end of Ben, as did Pat Freiermuth. But once Ben retired, they were all just kind of trying to find their own way. Russell Wilson was, I think, supposed to be that last year for the offense, but the calf strain, got him off to a start where he couldn't do a lot on the field. And you always have to have the on the field portion of it, or else guys aren't going to care what you're saying to them, I think. Otherwise, you'd be a coach. So,
right.
Maybe by the end, Russ's style sort of fell on deaf ears. What is Aaron Rodgers' style going to be? I don't really know. I think that's kind of difficult to tell too at this point, since he's only been here for a few weeks and wasn't involved in any sort of, plays against the defense, live practice. So yeah, I mean, how much it matters, I guess that's one of those things where it's always like, oh, when a team's playing poorly, oh, they don't have any leadership. They don't have an identity. When a team's playing well, it's always like, yeah, everybody gets along great. It's kumbaya. When sometimes it's just one team's executing and the other isn't. One team has a better roster than the other. But this is the NFL where all 32 teams have the same amount of money to spend, technically. And, sometimes it is the intangibles that put you over the top. So I don't know where it's going to lead to. I think it's very much a question mark because, someone like Pat Freiermuth, he's gotten the second contract. He knows the quote unquote Steeler way, which is another thing that is sort of part and parcel with this discussion that sometimes gets blown out of proportion a little bit. Like I said, the Steeler way suddenly becomes a talking point when you lose 3 games in a row. And it's like, why doesn't this team follow the Steeler way? But, I think Freiermuth is a guy who's kind of at the head of, he's leading the charge here a little bit, but like, do O-linemen look to him? I don't know. Will Aaron Rodgers be that guy for, the wide receivers? Will DK be that guy for the wide receivers? Will players gravitate toward those two that I just mentioned because of how accomplished they are in the NFL? Or does it not hit the same because they're new as well and they're also sort of trying to figure out their place in things? So I think that's going to be interesting to track. Just off the cuff here, who do you think the captains are going to be for this team? I guess we can easily say Cam Heyward and Miles Killebrew, but other than that,
I mean, Cam Heyward, because they
Aaron
usually
Rodgers,
have
quarterback's always a captain, just about.
Quarterback's always a captain because they have a team captain, a defensive captain, an offensive captain, and a special teams captain. So I could see Cam Heyward still your team captain, Aaron Rodgers your offensive captain, maybe TJ Watt your defensive captain, and Miles Killebrew's your special teams captain.
I guess you don't think they're trading TJ Watt then, Chris?
Yes, I don't think they're trading TJ Watt. As many
I
times
left that open ended for you when I said Cam Heyward and Miles Killebrew were probably the only locks. But
I saw you did that, and so I raise you, sir, and I say TJ Watt is, or I guess I call you. I don't know. I'm not in vacation mode yet. I don't know. I got to get my poker game up. But again, back to this idea of what the Steelers are doing. The other aspect of this, Brian, is that the front office is making a lot of moves. The upheaval has been consistent. This will be the 5th straight year with a different starting quarterback. When you think of Ben Roethlisberger in 2001, Mitch Trubisky in 2002, Kenny Pickett in 2003, Justin Fields in 2004, 2-4, you know what I'm saying, in 2024, and then Aaron Rodgers in 25. That's 5 straight years of different quarterbacks that to start.
And we all heard Aaron Rodgers on the Pat McAfee show. I don't think he's going to be there in 26.
So most likely it's going to be a 6th next year, where you're also getting rid of guys like George Pickens and Najee Harris.
Would you recount Ben or Kenny if they come back for 26? Or Mitch Trubisky?
I mean, it's a different one. So yeah, it's not. But yeah, that'd be pretty wild if either.
You didn't call me on that. You just kind of checked. You checked right there, and you're like, let's keep it moving. Brian said something stupid. Move along. Get to the end of the show.
But again, I think there's a lot of changes happening right now, and I do think there's a bit of newness in how Omar Khan's going about this, in maybe the positional value that he's placing here. Like, for example, they're back to back first round picks of offensive tackles. Tackle has not been a position the Steelers have prioritized in the past as much. They wanted to get the superstar center, the superstar guards. Now they're getting the superstar tackles because at the NFL positional values, that's what's considered more important in modern.
That reminds me. I wanted to mention that in the first segment, Chris, is we've talked on here a bunch about how they've never really invested much into slot corner. And I don't know if you I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Jalen Ramsey is coming to the Steelers to be their nickel. But if he's going to be playing a lot of nickel, then there's no close second to the amount of resources they've devoted to that guy being an inside corner.
Right. And again, maybe that's just part of them saying, hey, we are switching up with the times of the NFL, trying to get things right and be up to date with the modernization of the league.
Remember Beanie Bishop? Is this the end of the Beanie Bishop?
It might be because unless Jalen Ramsey just bumps to the outside after Darius Slay's gone and Beanie gets his chance at the slot position. But yeah, I think
Beanie better get in the dime. He better find a way to get in there in the dime, or hope Jalen Ramsey is going full Rod Woodson on us and playing free safety all the time. But yeah, I mean, I guess they're just a nut, they kind of sat there and they're like, okay, we can't keep doing the Arthur Millette, Chandon Sullivan, Elijah Riley, Beanie Bishop. So I guess you could throw Cam Sutton in that bucket, at least late stage Cam Sutton, like veteran retread, essentially, or chip on the shoulder rookie, constantly trying to be the answer at that position.
Especially in today's NFL, when that's becoming more and more a targeted position in the offense that can legit hurt defenses. So I look at that. I think unless you're the Steelers, I think there is a modernization as far as what the front office is doing in that respect. But I don't think aggression and change is necessarily the change, because the Steelers weren't like that towards the end of the 2010s. Because they had so many players locked in. They had Ben Roethlisberger on a big QB contract. They had several all-pro players like Ryan Shazier, Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, and then several other key role players that they had signed for big money deals. When you have all those guys signed up, it's tough to be aggressive and just move things around all the time, because you're trying to win with that core. Same thing with the end of the 2000s and the early 2010s when they were trying to win with that core. And so the Steelers have prioritized that. Now, I think the difference is right now, they don't have that core, and they're trying to assemble a core that they can kind of hold on to for a bit longer. And when you go back to Kevin Colbert's early days in the early 2000s, when they were trying to find it, he was pretty aggressive. He traded up to get this guy, went and got this guy in free agency, was really aggressive. I don't know if the aggression is any different with Omar Khan, but I do think the direction with the aggression is different as far as how the Steelers front office is making their moves.
Yeah, and basically pointing to what you just said there, a lot of it is trying to paper over or clean up the mess left by missed draft picks, whether that was bad evaluations, bad development, both, because that's ultimately why you don't have that next generation of a homegrown core of Steelers like the names that you just rattled off.
Absolutely. We're going to cover more aspects of this in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette all week long and going into training camp. Still a lot to discuss as there's things, and who knows, maybe more moves are coming. Be sure to keep up with all those moves here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He's Brian Batko. I'm Chris Carter. Thanks so much for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. A reminder, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as daily content that comes out from all of our writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm going to be on vacation for a bit. I'll be back around training camp time. So this is the last show you'll see me for a while on this channel, but I'll still have a film study coming on Jalen Ramsey. There'll still be plenty of other content coming out from all of our sports writers here. Stay tuned for all that and more here
on the
North Shore Drive podcast.
We'll miss you.
Deuces. I'll miss y'all a little bit, but I'm going to be enjoying my time off. I'll see y'all soon here in the North Shore Drive podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.